What began with a fragile baby, a grieving couple, and a rescue puppy would soon inspire a movement that changed lives far beyond their own. Late one quiet evening, as baby Oliver, just 6 months old and paralyzed from the waist down, slept soundly in his crib, a sense of calm settled over the Miller household. Little did his parents know the night was about to take a turn that would leave them forever changed. Their scrappy young puppy, Charlie, began to act in a way that neither Grace nor Tom had ever seen before. He paced the room with growing urgency, ears perked, eyes darting toward the crib, as if sensing something unseen. Then, in the stillness of the night, Charlie did something that would make the impossible feel real, something that would later be described as nothing short of a miracle. What could such a small, seemingly ordinary puppy possibly do to earn such a title? The Millers lived in a modest home tucked away on the edge of town, a house filled with love, but also with the kind of exhaustion that seeps deep into the soul. Grace and Tom had welcomed Oliver into their lives just half a year earlier, but those 6 months had felt like a lifetime. Their beautiful son had come into the world with a rare condition that left him paralyzed from the waist down, requiring round-the-clock care and medical attention. Though their hearts were overflowing with love for Oliver, Grace and Tom often found themselves silently wondering if love alone was enough. Their lives were a whirlwind of doctor visits, therapy appointments, and long nights filled with worry. They clung to each other and to hope, doing everything they could to give their son the life he deserved. Grace, a compassionate and skilled nurse, had stepped away from her job to care for Oliver full-time. Meanwhile, Tom juggled his role as a remote software engineer, working long hours to provide for their little family. They were a team, tired, stretched thin, but determined. And in the midst of their chaos came a little four-legged surprise who would soon become far more than just a pet. Charlie had appeared in their backyard one chilly morning, a scruffy little pup with sad eyes and a wagging tail. Grace, with her ever-tender heart, insisted they keep him. She believed he would bring a sense of balance to their weary lives, and she was right. Charlie was a ball of energy and affection, a distraction from the heavy reality they faced each day. But more than that, he formed an unspoken bond with baby Oliver from the very start. He would curl up beside Oliver's crib, resting his chin on the edge as if standing guard. His soft whimpers and wagging tail became part of the nursery's background symphony. To Grace and Tom, Charlie wasn't just a pet, he was family. A furry guardian angel perhaps, though they didn't know it yet. On that particular night, the air in the house was heavy with silence. Grace had just laid Oliver down after a long evening, his little body finally at rest. Tom, drained from work, had fallen asleep on the nursery couch, one arm draped over a pillow. A soft amber glow from the nightlight washed over Oliver's peaceful face, but Charlie was not at ease. He paced back and forth in front of the crib, ears alert, nose twitching. Something was wrong. He let out a soft, almost pleading whine. His small frame trembled, energy coiled tight like a spring. Then, without warning, Charlie barked sharply, not loud, but urgent. That bark sliced through the quiet and stirred Grace from her half-sleep in the next room. As she rushed into the nursery, Charlie was pawing at the crib, his eyes wide and focused. And that's when Grace saw it. Oliver's tiny chest was barely moving. Panic surged through her. She scooped her son into her arms, his face red and far too warm. His breath was shallow, too shallow. Her instincts kicked in instantly. Nurse, mother, protector. She called Tom's name, her voice rising with fear. He jolted awake and took one look at Oliver before grabbing the diaper bag and car keys. "We're going to the hospital," Grace said, barely holding it together. Within minutes, they were in the car, racing through the quiet streets, headlights cutting through the early morning fog. Behind them, Charlie barked and scratched at the front door, frantic, as if trying to say, "Don't leave him alone." At the emergency room, Oliver was whisked away into the care of a team of nurses and doctors. Tubes, wires, and medical jargon filled the space around Grace and Tom, who could do nothing but hold each other's hands and wait. Questions flooded their minds. Had they missed something? Was this something new? Were they losing him? Hours passed like days. Eventually, a young pediatrician emerged, his expression calm but serious. "Oliver has developed a high-grade fever," he explained. "It appears to be the early stages of an infection. The good news is we caught it in time. He's responding to treatment, but with his condition, even a minor illness can escalate quickly. You did the right thing bringing him in." Grace felt her knees go weak with relief. Her eyes filled with tears, half from fear, half from gratitude. She looked at Tom and whispered, "Charlie knew." They stayed at the hospital for the rest of the day, hovering over their son, watching his colour return, his breathing steady out. Grace gently stroked his hair, while Tom whispered stories in his ear. Slowly, the tight knot in their chests began to loosen. By evening, Oliver's fever had dropped. The doctors, after one last round of checks, cleared them to go home under close observation. They returned to their house under a lavender sky, the day fading into twilight. As they opened the door, Charlie was right there, tail wagging, tongue lolling, eyes filled with concern and joy all at once. Grace dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around the little dog. "Good boy," she whispered into his fur. "You saved him." Tom bent down too, rubbing Charlie behind the ears. "You knew before any of us. You felt it." Charlie leaned into their touch, giving a soft, contented sigh. That night, as Oliver lay sleeping once again, this time with the faint hum of a baby monitor echoing through the room, Charlie resumed his post beside the crib. Silent, watchful, steady. To the Millers, he wasn't just a dog anymore, he was a miracle. That night, after putting Oliver to bed, Grace and Tom sank into the couch, utterly spent, emotionally, physically, and mentally drained. "We're doing everything we can, right?" Tom asked quietly. The words barely escaping his lips, Grace turned to him, her eyes shimmering with tears she refused to let fall. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but soft. "We're giving him all the love and care he needs. That's all we can do." Charlie, sensing the heavy mood in the room, hopped up onto the couch. He nestled himself between them with a small sigh, his warm little body pressing against Grace's side. She reached down and scratched behind his ears without thinking, drawing comfort from the simple act. There was something about Charlie, something grounding, something good, but neither of them knew just how vital Charlie would soon become. Not yet. Around midnight, the quiet hum of the house was broken by a faint, high-pitched whine. Charlie, as was now his habit, had settled himself in Oliver's room. He took his watchful post every night beside the crib, never far from the baby he had grown so attached to. But this time, something stirred him. Something wasn't right. He stood up, muscles tensing, ears pricked forward. Another soft whine escaped him. Oliver's breathing had changed. It was slight, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, but Charlie sensed it. The gentle rhythm of the baby's chest had become erratic, uneven. A faint rasp accompanied each breath, and Oliver's lips began to lose their usual pink hue. Charlie's whines grew more urgent. He circled the crib, tail stiff, panic setting in. Then finally he barked, a sharp, loud warning that sliced through the silence. Down the hall, Tom jolted awake, heart hammering. "What was that?" he muttered groggily, rubbing his eyes. He turned and shook Grace, who blinked up at him, alarmed. Another bark, louder this time. "It's coming from Oliver's room," Grace said, bolting upright. They sprinted down the hallway, each step fueled by adrenaline and dread. The scene that greeted them stopped them cold. Oliver was still in his crib, but his face had turned pale, and his body twitched slightly, unnaturally. His breaths were shallow, strained, and his lips, they were tinged blue. "Tom, call 911!" Grace cried, rushing to lift Oliver from the crib. She cradled him gently but firmly, patting his back in swift, practiced motions, trying to stimulate his breathing. Her nurse training flooded back in a surge, but beneath it was the raw panic of a mother watching her child fade. Tom's hands trembled as he grabbed his phone, fingers fumbling to dial. He relayed their address to the dispatcher, voice tight with fear. Meanwhile, Charlie barked again, sharper this time, his whole body taut with urgency as he stood next to Grace, as if pushing them to move faster. Within minutes, red and blue lights lit up the front yard. Paramedics rushed in, taking Oliver from Grace's arms with practiced urgency. They worked quickly, assessing, monitoring, stabilizing. "You did everything right," one EMT told Grace, impressed with her calm under pressure. But Grace shook her head, eyes falling to the small dog at her feet. "It wasn't me," she said quietly. "It was Charlie. If he hadn't warned us, we wouldn't have woken up in time." The paramedics nodded, their expressions sobering. Oliver was carefully transported to the hospital, Grace and Tom following closely behind, clinging to each other in the back seat of the ambulance. The weight of what had almost happened settled over them like a shadow. Their son, so small, so fragile, had been mere moments from a tragedy. And it was Charlie who had saved him. At the hospital, after an exhaustive round of tests, a pediatric specialist met them in the hallway. "He likely experienced a brief apnea episode," the doctor explained gently. "It's not uncommon in babies with his condition. His breathing stopped temporarily, but your fast response made all the difference. It could have been much worse." Grace and Tom exchanged a look that said everything they couldn't say aloud: relief, fear, gratitude, and something more. Or they had always known Oliver's condition required constant vigilance, but now they knew just how quickly things could spiral, how even a moment of delay could change everything, and how even the smallest voice, like a dog's bark, could be a life-saving cry. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions: relief that Oliver was safe, lingering fear of what could have been, and overwhelming gratitude for their unlikely little hero, Charlie. Their scrappy, untrained puppy had acted on instinct alone. He had known somehow that Oliver was in danger, and he'd made sure they knew too. Grace found herself watching Charlie differently now. She noticed the way he never left Oliver's side, the way he listened, not just with his ears, but with something deeper, some hidden sense, some connection that defied logic. Her curiosity grew, and she began to research. Articles about service dogs filled her browser, stories of animals trained to detect epileptic seizures, diabetic crashes, even cancer. Dogs that could sense changes in heart rate or breathing before a monitor could. But Charlie had no such training, no specialized schooling or commands. He was a stray they had found in their yard just a few short weeks ago, and yet he had done something extraordinary. The more she read, the more fascinated Grace became. Science could explain part of it. Dogs had incredible senses after all, but there was something about Charlie that felt different. Something unmeasurable, something instinctual and pure, something unspoken. Tom felt it too. They both began to see Charlie not just as a pet, but as Oliver's silent guardian, a protector with no uniform, no badge, just a heart that beat in time with the child he had chosen as his own. And though they were still scared, still wary of what might come next, they felt something else too. They felt safer, because now they knew they weren't alone in watching over Oliver. They had Charlie, and Charlie never looked away. One quiet evening, as the family settled into their usual nighttime routine, a familiar tension crept into the air. Grace, gently rocking Oliver in her arms after his evening bottle, noticed something strange. Charlie was already in the nursery, positioned near the crib, like always, but this time there was something different in his posture. His small body was stiff, ears perked sharply, eyes fixed on the crib with a piercing intensity that sent a ripple of anxiety through her chest. Grace laid Oliver down gently and knelt beside the little dog, brushing her fingers through the soft fur at his neck. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. Charlie let out a low, almost mournful whine, his gaze never leaving Oliver's sleeping face. Grace's heart quickened. She could feel it in her bones. This was the same behavior Charlie had shown the night he saved their son. "Tom!" she called, louder than she intended, her voice trembling. Tom appeared in the doorway in seconds, sensing the urgency. "What's wrong?" he asked, already scanning the room. Grace gestured to Charlie. "He's acting strange again, like that night?" Tom moved closer, crouching beside her. Together they watched as Charlie remained frozen, alert and unblinking, a silent sentinel. "You think he knows something's wrong?" Tom asked, his voice low. "I don't know," Grace admitted, "but I'm not going to ignore him, not after last time." Without another word, the two of them quietly agreed. They'd keep watch tonight. No chances, no mistakes. They brewed coffee and took turns resting and sitting by the crib. Charlie didn't move from his spot, his small frame silhouetted in the gentle glow of the nightlight. Hours ticked by in silence, the only sound the soft hum of the baby monitor and the occasional creak of the house settling. Nothing happened. And slowly, the tension in Grace's shoulders began to ease. Maybe they were overreacting. Maybe it had been a false alarm. A dog's instinct couldn't always be right, could it? Then the clock struck midnight. Oliver stirred. At first, it was just a soft, muffled cry, barely louder than a whimper. Grace leaned in, whispering soothing words, but something was wrong. His breathing, it was shallow, uneven. Her hands moved with urgency as she picked him up, supporting his head, gently patting his back. His tiny chest rose and fell in unsteady gasps, and a thin wheeze rattled in his throat. Panic surged. "Tom!" she called, the sharpness in her voice jolting him fully awake. "We need to go now!" Tom was already on his feet, grabbing the diaper bag with one hand and the car keys with the other. As they raced out the door, Charlie barked wildly behind them, frantic and loud, his yelps echoing down the street as if begging them to hurry, as if he knew exactly what was at stake. At the hospital, they moved swiftly, now practiced in the routine they wished they never had to perfect. Doctors took Oliver immediately, ushering him into a room filled with monitors and quiet urgency. Grace and Tom stood by helplessly, clinging to each other and to hope. Minutes stretched into hours. The pediatric specialist finally emerged, clipboard in hand. His face was calm, focused, relief, but not without gravity. "We've identified the cause," he said, voice steady. "Oliver has a condition called central apnea. It's rare, but we see it in infants with neurological complications." He paused, letting the weight of the diagnosis settle. In simple terms, his brain occasionally forgets to send the signal to breathe. It doesn't mean he'll stop breathing forever, but in those moments, without intervention, it can become very dangerous. Grace gripped the arm of the chair to steady herself, her nurse's brain already racing through medical literature. Central apnea. She had studied it in school, but never imagined it would touch her own child. She glanced at Tom, who looked as though the wind had been knocked out of him. There was relief. They finally had an answer, but the diagnosis also came with fear. Another challenge, another layer of complexity in their son's fragile life. Grace's eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears back. Not here, not yet. The doctor continued, outlining a treatment plan. Sleep studies, close monitoring, possible use of a home apnea monitor. They would need to keep a constant watch on Oliver, especially at night. Grace nodded, absorbing every word, every instruction. When the doctor left, Tom turned to her. "How are we supposed to keep doing this?" he asked quietly. Grace didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a photo, one she had taken just days before. It was of Charlie, curled up next to Oliver, his tiny paw resting gently on the baby's arm. "We're not doing it alone," she said. The doctor continued gently. "The good news is that it's manageable. We'll provide you with a monitor to track Oliver's breathing. It will alert you if there's a problem, so you can respond quickly. Many parents find it gives them some peace of mind." Tom nodded, his grip on Grace's hand tightening. "Thank you," he said, voice thick with gratitude. Back home, the Millers carefully set up the breathing monitor in Oliver's nursery. The soft glow of its screen offered a new kind of reassurance, one backed by technology, a sense of control. But even with the monitor's sensors and alarms, Charlie never let down his guard. The little dog remained a constant presence by Oliver's crib. He curled up near the base at night, dozing lightly but ever alert, his eyes flicking open at the faintest sound. It was as if he had assumed a sacred duty, one he had no intention of surrendering. Soon, Grace and Tom began to notice something uncanny. Charlie didn't just react when the monitor beeped, he often moved before it did. A tense whine, a sharp bark, a sudden stillness. These came first, followed by the soft chime of the machine seconds later. It was as though Charlie could sense Oliver's breathing irregularities before any device could register them. One quiet afternoon, Grace was in the kitchen chopping vegetables when Charlie's bark rang out from the nursery, sharp and insistent. She dropped the knife and ran. Oliver was lying awkwardly in his crib, one tiny leg caught between the slats. He wasn't crying, but the angle looked painful, and left too long. It could have led to real harm. Grace gently freed his leg, her hands trembling slightly as she checked him over. He was fine. She scooped Charlie into her arms. "Good boy," she whispered, hugging him close. "You're our little guardian angel." Word of Charlie's quiet heroism began to spread among friends and family. During a visit, Grace's sister, a veterinarian, watched the dog closely. "You should have him evaluated," she said thoughtfully. "He's displaying all the signs of a medical alert dog. If he's this good without training, imagine what he could do with it." The idea struck a chord in Grace's heart. A service dog. Could Charlie's natural instincts be trained, refined, to offer even more protection for Oliver? It was a hope she hadn't realized she was holding on to until that moment. As the weeks passed, the Millers found a rhythm. Life still had its anxious moments, but the breathing monitor offered stability, and Charlie offered something even deeper, trust. When Grace and Tom closed their eyes at night, it was the sound of Charlie's soft breathing and the warmth of his body beside Oliver's crib that brought them comfort. Every bark, every nudge, every knowing glance seemed to say, "I'm here, I've got this." What they didn't yet know was that Charlie's role in their story was only just beginning. One crisp autumn morning, sunlight spilled gently through the Miller's kitchen window, warming the hardwood floors. Grace stood at the counter with a mug of coffee, watching Tom and Charlie play in the backyard. Laughter echoed faintly through the glass, and upstairs, Oliver slept peacefully. For the first time in a long while, things felt calm. The air held a softness, a sense of normal. But the moment was short-lived. Charlie, mid-chase after a tennis ball, froze. His head snapped toward the front of the house, ears up, nose twitching. Then came a low, unfamiliar growl. Tom slowed, watching him. "What is it, boy?" he asked cautiously. Charlie didn't respond. He bolted past Tom, around the side of the house, his body taut with focus. Inside, Grace heard the sudden barking and stepped onto the porch, heart skipping. "Tom? What's going on?" Tom joined her, eyes narrowed. "I don't know." He took off toward the front. They followed, rounding the corner to find Charlie at the edge of the yard, growling sharply at the fence line. Beyond it, a man stood on the sidewalk, unfamiliar, nervous, holding a small, wrapped package. Charlie stood between the man and the house, tail rigid, barking furiously, every hair on his back raised. "Can I help you?" Grace called, her tone calm but firm. The man flinched. I have something for you," he stammered, holding out the package. "It's about your son." A chill passed through Grace. Tom stepped protectively in front of her. "How do you know about our son?" The man's eyes darted to Charlie, then back to them. "Please," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I promised someone I'd deliver this." The barking didn't stop. Grace took a cautious step forward. "Promised who?" The man hesitated, visibly torn. His hands trembled as he slowly held out the package again. "Her name was Carla," he said. "She told me, if anything ever happened to her, I needed to find you." The man stammered, eyes flicking nervously between them. "Just read the letter inside." Grace reached out, hesitating only a moment before taking the package from his outstretched hands. Her fingers trembled. But before she or Tom could ask anything more, the man turned and walked quickly away, disappearing down the street without another word. Inside the house, an uneasy silence filled the living room as they unwrapped the package on the kitchen table. Inside was a folded letter, handwritten, the edges worn, and a smaller envelope containing several old photographs. Grace picked up the letter and began to read, her voice catching as she spoke the first line aloud. "Dear Millers, I'm sorry for approaching you this way. I didn't know what else to do. I know about Oliver because I knew his birth mother. She came to me before she left him with you, desperate and broken. She asked me to make sure you had everything you needed to care for him." Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Tom leaned in, his brow furrowed. The letter continued, recounting Carla's hardships, her life as a young mother trying to raise a paralyzed child on her own, her escape from an abusive relationship, and the impossible decision she had made to entrust her baby to a family she believed could give him a better life. The man, it turned out, had been a close friend to Carla. She had asked him, her last lifeline, to watch from a distance, to be sure her child was safe. "She loved him," Grace whispered. She never stopped loving him. Tom opened the envelope of photos, spreading them gently on the table. Some were faded, corners curled with age. One photo made Grace's hands shake. A young woman, Carla, sat cradling a tiny newborn in her arms. At her feet, curled protectively against her leg, was a familiar figure, a small, wide-eyed puppy with a white blaze on his chest, Charlie. He was with her, Grace breathed, her voice unsteady. Tom nodded, speechless. That explains everything. Charlie wasn't just a stray, he was part of Oliver's story from the beginning. The realization crashed over them like a wave. Charlie hadn't wandered into their backyard by chance. He had come home, drawn by a connection no one had understood until now. Grace knelt beside the dog, tears brimming in her eyes. She ran her fingers gently through his fur. "You've always known, haven't you?" she whispered. "You were never lost. You were finding your way back to him." Charlie gazed up at her, eyes calm and steady, as if he understood every word. "You're part of this family too," Grace said softly. "We're so lucky to have you." In the days that followed, Grace and Tom found themselves drawn deeper into Carla's past. The letter had brought a measure of peace, but also raised new questions. Among the items left behind was a small, spiral-bound notebook filled with Carla's handwriting, her journal. Its pages told the quiet, raw story of a young woman trying to hold on. One entry stood out. "She adored that puppy, Linda Cont. There's a shelter in town where they've always been kind to me. It's where I found Charlie. They took us in when we had nowhere else to go. If something ever happens, I hope they'll remember us." Grace's heart ached. She needed to know more. The next morning, she called the shelter listed in Carla's journal. When she explained who she was and mentioned Charlie, the woman on the other end fell silent, then said warmly, "We remember them. Please, come by." That afternoon, Grace drove to the shelter, a quiet brick building tucked between a row of trees. She was greeted at the door by a kind woman named Linda, whose smile carried the weight of memories. In a small, sunlit office, they sat across from each other, a mug of tea cradled in Grace's hands. "Carla and Charlie stayed here for a while," Linda said, her voice gentle. She was so young, frightened, but determined. "I remember the night she showed up with him. It was raining, and she wouldn't come inside until she knew we'd take the dog too." Grace swallowed the lump in her throat. "She adored that puppy," Linda continued. "Said he was the only thing keeping her going. She didn't have much, but she had him, and he gave her hope." Grace looked down at the photos she'd brought along, one hand resting on the image of Carla and Charlie. "She gave us hope too," she said quietly. "Even now she's still guiding us." Grace's chest tightened as she imagined Carla clutching Charlie during her loneliest, most vulnerable moments. A girl barely out of childhood herself, holding on to a puppy like a lifeline. "Do you know why she left?" Grace asked quietly. "Or where she went after?" Linda sighed, her expression clouded with memory. "She didn't say much, but I remember one thing clearly. She talked about finding a family for Charlie if she couldn't care for him anymore. She wanted him to be safe. That mattered more to her than anything else." Before Grace left, Linda reached into a desk drawer and pulled out a small envelope. "She left this behind. I kept it just in case someone ever came looking." Inside was a single photograph, Carla and Charlie, both younger, taken in the shelter's courtyard. Carla was smiling faintly, a hand resting on Charlie's head. On the back, written in delicate script, were the words, "Thank you for giving me hope when I needed it most." Grace blinked back tears. She tucked the photo into her purse and embraced Linda with quiet gratitude. Back home, she showed Tom the photograph and recounted the visit. "It's so clear now," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Carla loved both Oliver and Charlie deeply, but she was so alone." Tom was silent for a long moment, then said, maybe we can do something for others like her. Something lasting." Grace looked at him, eyes widening. "What if we started a fund, a program to help single parents or families with medically fragile kids like Carla and Oliver?" Tom smiled. "In Carla's name, to honor her memory." They got to work that same night, sketching out ideas for a community fund. They knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be forms, meetings, outreach, and so much more. But it felt right, necessary. Still, they needed help. They reached out to friends, relatives, neighbors, anyone who might care. The response was warm but modest. Then, during a brainstorming session one evening, Tom looked over at Charlie, curled protectively at Oliver's side. "Everyone loves a dog story," he said with a grin. What if we told his story, show people how Charlie saved Oliver's life, how he was a part of this family long before we knew it? Grace lit up. Yes, if people knew about Charlie and Carla, it could inspire them to help. They launched a small social media campaign, just a few photos, a short video, and a heartfelt post sharing their journey. Oliver's diagnosis, Carla's silent sacrifice, and the incredible bond between a boy and the dog who had never stopped watching over him. The reaction was staggering. The post went viral in just a few days. Comments and shares poured in. Donations trickled in at first, then surged. Families from across the country shared their own stories of adoption, illness, and unexpected blessings. One message stood out to Grace. "I knew Carla. She was my neighbor once. She always talked about wanting a better life for her son. She'd be proud of what you're doing." That message stayed with her for days. As momentum grew, something shifted in the household. Charlie seemed lighter, more playful, his tail wagging more, his eyes brighter. It was as if he sensed the good that was blooming around them. Oliver flourished too. His laughter, once rare, now echoed through the halls as he played with Charlie, his little guardian, his brother in fur. But amid the joy, quiet questions still lingered. One evening, as Grace rocked Oliver gently in the nursery, she looked over at Tom and said softly, "Do you ever wonder if there's more we don't know about Carla? What if someone else out there loved her and is still searching for answers?" Tom wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "If there is, we'll find them. But for now, we keep moving forward. For Oliver, for Charlie, and for her." The next day, a journalist from a local paper reached out after seeing the viral post. "I'd love to write a feature on your family," she said. "Your story. It could bring hope to so many people." Grace and Tom hesitated. Public exposure was daunting, but the opportunity to reach others who might be suffering in silence was more important. They agreed. The article, titled "From Stray to Savior: How a Puppy Changed One Family's Life," appeared on the front page of the Sunday paper, and within days, national outlets picked it up. The messages that followed were overwhelming. Stories of resilience, grief, adoption, unexpected joy, and hope. Through it all, Charlie remained a quiet, grounding presence. He seemed to know when Grace needed peace, resting his head in her lap, nuzzling her hand, watching over Oliver with steadfast devotion. As the world took notice, the Millers held on to the truth they had always known. The most powerful stories don't begin in headlines or hospital rooms, but in the quiet, steady love shared between those who choose to care, even when no one is watching. One afternoon, as Grace watched Oliver toddling through the backyard, Charlie close behind, she whispered, "We're so lucky to have him. He's more than just a dog. He's a piece of Carla, and a reminder of everything she wanted for Oliver." Tom joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "And a reminder," he said softly, "that even in the darkest times there's always a light." Grace nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Enough for him, but she loved him more than anything. Emily's voice had trembled when she shared a memory. She used to say that Charlie was her way of staying connected to him. He was all she had left of Oliver, apart from her dreams. The conversation with Emily had brought Grace a sense of closure, but it also deepened her resolve. The fund, Carla's legacy, had to succeed. They needed to ensure that other families struggling with challenges like theirs, could feel the same love and hope they'd found. They decided to organize a community event to raise awareness and support. It would be a day to celebrate love, resilience, and the power of giving. The event took place in the town park on a warm, sun-drenched Saturday. Families gathered, enjoying food, games, and live music. Charlie, ever the protector, quickly became the star of the day. Children squealed with laughter as they played fetch with him, and adults gathered to listen in quiet admiration as Grace and Tom shared the story of the dog who had saved their son's life and helped a grieving mother find purpose again. As the sun began to dip low and the event drew to a close, Grace stepped up onto the small stage, Oliver cradled in her arms and Charlie at her feet. The crowd fell silent. Carla believed in the power of love and kindness, Grace began, her voice steady despite the emotion that thickened her throat. She gave us the greatest gift we could ever ask for, and we want to honor her by giving back to others. She paused, scanning the sea of faces. Thank you for helping us keep her legacy alive. The crowd erupted into applause. Grace's heart swelled as she glanced down at Charlie, who wagged his tail and let out a soft, contented woof, as if to say, "We did it." The success of Carla's legacy brought the Millers more than pride. It brought an unexpected surge of attention. News outlets began to reach out, requesting interviews and features. Grace and Tom were cautious. They wanted to protect Oliver's privacy while keeping the fund visible enough to help as many families as possible. One evening, as they reviewed their upcoming commitments, Tom's phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He hesitated before answering. "Mr. Miller?" a calm voice said. "My name is Dr. Sylvia Green. I'm a psychologist who worked with Carla at the shelter. I've been following your story, and I believe I have something that might interest you." Tom sat up straighter. "What is it, Doctor?" "Green? She left behind some personal writings, letters she wrote but never sent. She wanted Oliver to have them someday, but didn't know when or how to pass them along. I believe now may be the right time." The next morning, Grace and Tom met Dr. Green in her office. She handed them a small, worn journal tied with a faded piece of string. Carla wrote about her dreams, her fears, and her love for Oliver, Dr. Green said softly. She wanted him to know that he was never unloved. Grace's hands trembled as she untied the string and opened the journal. The first page bore a simple inscription, "To my son Oliver. I hope these words help you understand how much you've always meant to me." Later that night, as they sat side by side reading through the entries, the raw honesty of Carla's words overwhelmed them. One passage in particular stood out. "I hope you grow up knowing you were never a burden, but a blessing. I wasn't strong enough to give you the life you deserved, but I found a family who could. They are my greatest gift to you, just as you were my greatest gift to the world." Grace wiped away the tears as she read the words aloud. "She loved him so much," she whispered. "I wish she could see how happy he is now." The journal revealed a side of Carla they hadn't known, a young woman full of dreams and aspirations. She had wanted to become a nurse, inspired by the compassion she'd seen in others. She had even dreamed of starting her own shelter for women and children, a safe haven where no one would feel as alone as she once had. Tom closed the journal slowly, his heart heavy with emotion. "We need to make her dream a reality," he said quietly, "not just for Oliver, but for Carla." Grace nodded, her determination shining through. "Let's expand the fund. We can support shelters and programs that help single parents and children in need." But as they planned the next phase of Carla's legacy, a new challenge emerged. A reporter from a national news outlet reached out, eager to feature their story. The Millers were torn, grateful for the opportunity to raise awareness, yet deeply concerned about overexposing their family. After a careful discussion, they agreed to the interview, but set clear boundaries to protect Oliver's privacy. The journalist, a thoughtful woman named Leah, spent a day with the Millers. She observed their life, listened to their story, and witnessed the quiet strength that held them together. During the interview, Leah asked about Charlie. "He's more than just a dog," Grace said, her voice filled with affection. "He's a guardian, a companion, and a living reminder of Carla's love." Leah's article, titled "From Struggle to Strength: How a Family Turned Tragedy into Hope," was published a week later. It touched hearts across the country, sparking a wave of donations and messages of encouragement. People shared their own stories of resilience and strength, and the fund grew exponentially. But with newfound attention came an unexpected twist. One afternoon, as Grace sorted through the growing pile of donation records at the kitchen table, she found a plain, unmarked envelope in the mail. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single handwritten note. "Carla was brave to leave Oliver with you, but there's more to her story than you know. If you want the truth, meet me at the shelter where she stayed." The note was unsigned. It filled Grace with unease. She showed it to Tom, who read it silently, brow furrowed. "It could be nothing," he said cautiously, "but we can't ignore it." The next day, they returned to the shelter. Linda, the staff member who had helped them before, looked surprised to see them. When Grace showed her the note, Linda's expression turned somber. She exhaled slowly, as though the weight of the memory was settling in. "I don't know who sent it," Linda said carefully, "but Carla once told me she was afraid someone from her past might find her. She never gave details, just said she was running from something or someone." The revelation hung in the air like a shadow. Grace's heart raced. What could Carla have been running from? And why was someone only now coming forward with this cryptic message? What if there's more we still don't know? Grace murmured. Linda hesitated, then nodded. I don't know. But I've always suspected there was more to Carla's story. She didn't trust easily. She didn't want Oliver to ever be part of that pain. As Grace and Tom left the shelter, a heavy feeling of unease settled over them. Carla's story, once a tale of love, courage, and sacrifice, was beginning to unravel into something darker, something more complex. The anonymous note echoed in Grace's mind. There's more to her story than you know. It felt less like a message and more like a warning. The next morning, Tom suggested they move carefully. We should involve Linda more, he said. She might know someone who can shed light on Carla's past. Grace agreed, and they returned to the shelter that afternoon. Linda, already sensing their growing concern, had been looking into things herself. There was one person Carla confided in often, Linda said, a woman named Rachel. They used to talk late into the night. If anyone knows what Carla was going through, it's her. Linda arranged a meeting with Rachel, who now lived in transitional housing supported by the shelter. When Grace and Tom arrived, Rachel greeted them with a kind but hesitant smile. I wasn't sure I should talk about Carla, Rachel admitted softly. She kept her past close. But if it helps you understand her better, I'll tell you what I can. In a small, sunlit room, Rachel began to share. Carla was one of the strongest women I've ever met, she said, her voice filled with respect. But she was carrying a lot of pain. She told me she'd escaped a toxic relationship. The man she was with, he was controlling, manipulative. She left to protect Oliver. Grace's heart clenched. Do you think that's why she didn't feel safe raising him herself? Rachel nodded solemnly. She was always looking over her shoulder. She was afraid he'd find her. The truth hit Grace and Tom like a powerful wave. Carla hadn't simply given up her son because of hardship. She had done it to protect him. Her decision wasn't a matter of being unable to care for him. It was rooted in an unyielding love, in a fierce desire to keep him safe from a past that haunted her. She was stronger than we ever knew, Grace whispered, her voice thick with emotion. As they left Rachel's home, Grace's resolve grew. We have to do more, she told Tom. We need to help others like Carla, so no one else has to go through this alone. That night, they expanded Carla's legacy to include a fund specifically for survivors of domestic abuse. They reached out to local organizations, forging partnerships to provide shelter, counseling, and resources. The mission of Carla's legacy grew, no longer just a tribute to Carla's love for Oliver, but a beacon for women and children who had nowhere to turn. The community's response to Carla's legacy was nothing short of overwhelming. Donations poured in, and volunteers stepped forward to support the cause. The fund's momentum grew exponentially, touching the lives of countless families. One of the most touching moments came during a community event when a former shelter resident stood to share her own story. She spoke of the pain and fear that had defined her life, but also of the strength she found through the support of organizations like Carla's Legacy. Inspired by Carla's courage, her testimony moved the audience to tears and reminded everyone why the fund mattered so deeply. Meanwhile, Charlie's bond with Oliver deepened in ways that continued to amaze Grace and Tom. The once fragile baby had become a curious, energetic toddler, and Charlie remained his steadfast protector. One afternoon, as Grace watched from the kitchen window, she saw something miraculous. Oliver, using Charlie's back for support, was taking his first steps. "Tom, come look," she called out, her voice trembling with emotion. Together they watched, both filled with awe, as Oliver shuffled forward, fingers gripping Charlie's fur for balance. It was a scene that filled their hearts to overflowing. "It's a miracle," Grace whispered through her tears. "Charlie's done more for him than we ever imagined." Tom knelt beside them, a quiet understanding in his eyes. "She must have known," he said softly. "Carla knew we'd need Charlie to help complete our family." But even amid their joy, the anonymous letter still haunted them. Each passing day seemed to bring a new reminder that the mystery of Carla's past was far from resolved. One evening, just as they were settling in for the night, the doorbell rang. Grace opened the door to find a man standing on the porch. He was middle-aged, his weary eyes betraying a nervous energy as he removed his cap. "Mrs. Miller?" he asked, his voice tentative. "I'm not sure you'll want to hear this, but I have something to tell you about Carla." Grace hesitated, a flutter of unease rising in her chest. but she stepped aside and invited him in, her heart pounding. The man introduced himself as David, Carla's former landlord. He explained that after seeing the news about Carla's legacy, he recognized Carla's name and thought she should know the full story. "I saw the news," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I recognized her name. I thought you should know. I'm the one who helped her leave." David shared how Carla had come to him in desperation, seeking a safe place while she figured out her next steps. "She was terrified," he said. "She didn't talk much about her past, but it was clear. She was running from someone. She even mentioned you once, said she saw you at the hospital and just knew you were the right ones to raise Oliver." Grace's eyes filled with tears as the pieces of Carla's journey fell into place. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for helping her, for helping us." As David left, Grace felt a shift in her chest. Another piece of Carla's story had fallen into place. It wasn't just fear that had driven Carla to leave. It was her overwhelming maternal instinct, her desire to keep Oliver safe no matter the cost. Still, the shadow of the anonymous letter lingered. Who had sent it, and why? A few days later, as Grace sat at the kitchen table, reviewing updates for Carla's legacy, Tom entered the room holding a thick file. He looked serious, his brow furrowed. "Grace, I think I found something." He'd been quietly digging into Carla's past, carefully piecing together what they'd learned from Rachel and David. The file contained court records, including a restraining order Carla had filed years ago. As Tom flipped open the pages, Grace's stomach dropped. The name on it made her blood run cold. Brian Dempsey, Oliver's biological father. "Do you think he's the one who sent the note?" Grace's voice trembled as she asked the question, dreading the answer. Tom nodded slowly, his expression grave. "It's possible. He has a history of emotional abuse and manipulation. If he's found out where we are," he trailed off, his words hanging heavily in the air. "We need to be prepared." The weight of the situation pressed down on them both. They immediately contacted their attorney Sarah, who reviewed the restraining order and Oliver's custody documents with careful precision. "Legally, Oliver is fully yours," Sarah assured them, her voice steady. "But if this man decides to challenge it, even without grounds, it could cause a lot of stress. We'll need to be vigilant." As Grace sat with Tom, her mind racing, she couldn't shake the thought that they were no longer just fighting to protect Oliver. They were fighting to keep the family they had built safe from forces they couldn't yet fully understand. Grace's voice shook as she looked at Tom. "What can we do to protect him?" she asked, her eyes wide with fear. "Be proactive," their attorney Sarah replied calmly, though her words carried a weight of urgency. "File a protective order. Inform the authorities about the letter. If Brian Dempsey is involved, they need to know." As the Millers moved quickly through the legal steps, they leaned heavily on their community for support. Grace confided in Linda and Rachel, who offered unwavering strength and encouragement. "Carla trusted you," Linda said one evening, her gaze steady. "You're honoring her trust by standing strong for Oliver." Meanwhile, Charlie's instincts seemed to grow sharper. The loyal dog, who had once been a playful companion, now became more vigilant. He slept beside Oliver's crib each night, his ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. It was as if he could sense something the Millers could not. Then one rainy afternoon, the phone rang. It was the private investigator they had hired to find Brian Dempsey. "We found him," the investigator said. "Brian Dempsey. He's living a few towns over." Grace's heart skipped a beat. "Has he tried to contact us?" "Not directly," the investigator replied. "But he's asking questions. About you. About Oliver." The words hit like a gut punch. Grace's grip on the phone tightened, and her pulse quickened. Tom, who had been standing nearby, began pacing the living room, his jaw clenched tight. "We can't let him come near Oliver. He gave up his rights the day he walked away from them both." Grace nodded, her jaw set with determination. "We'll protect our son, no matter what." To rally strength and reaffirm their commitment to Carla's memory, they organized a new community event. This one would focus on raising awareness about domestic abuse, honoring Carla's courage, and reinforcing the importance of keeping families safe. The event was powerful, filled with heartfelt speeches and moments of reflection. It reminded everyone that they were not alone in their struggles. But as the crowd dispersed and people began to leave, Rachel approached Grace with a concerned look on her face. I think "I think I saw someone watching from the parking lot," she whispered. "It might be nothing, but I thought you should know." Grace's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes darted to the lot, but whoever had been there was gone. The unease in the pit of her stomach only deepened. That night, as they returned home, the air was thick with tension. Charlie's behavior was more alert than ever. His ears perked up immediately as they entered the house, and his nose twitched as he padded toward the back door, growling softly. "Did you hear that?" Grace whispered, barely audible. A faint rustling, a creaking sound from the backyard. The hairs on the back of Grace's neck stood on end. Tom grabbed a flashlight, his face grim, and stepped cautiously out into the night. Charlie followed, his body tense and alert. The rain had stopped, leaving the yard muddy and slick beneath their feet. Tom's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on something chilling, a set of fresh footprints leading toward the gate. Charlie growled low, his eyes trained on the footprints, the hairs on his back raised. "Grace, call the police," Tom said, his voice steady but urgent. Inside, Grace's heart raced as she dialed 911, her hands trembling. She pulled Oliver close to her chest, her breath quick and shallow as she waited for help to arrive. Outside, Tom and Charlie followed the trail of footprints to the edge of the property. At the gate, they found a piece of torn fabric caught on the fence. The sight sent a wave of dread through Grace's chest. Whoever had been here was too close to her family. By the time the police arrived, the rain had started up again, soft but steady. They conducted a thorough search of the area but found no sign of the intruder. "Whoever it was, they're gone now," the officer said, his voice calm but tinged with frustration. "We'll increase patrols in the area to keep an eye out." Grace stayed on edge as the police left, the unease settling deep in her bones. Whoever was behind this, whether it was Brian Dempsey or someone else, was watching them, and it seemed like they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. The incident had shaken the Millers, but it had also made them more determined than ever to protect their family. Grace looked down at Oliver, who slept peacefully, blissfully unaware of the danger that had come so close to their door. She whispered softly, "We won't let anything happen to you," as she held him tightly. That night, Tom carefully placed the torn fabric into a plastic bag, intending to have it analyzed for fingerprints. Charlie, ever the loyal guardian, curled up by Oliver's crib, his watchful eyes scanning the room as if to protect them. The next morning, Grace and Tom sat at the kitchen table, reviewing their options. The fabric sat in the sealed plastic bag on the counter, a chilling reminder of the danger lurking too close to home. "This can't just be a coincidence," Grace said, her voice steady, though the weight of the situation bore down on her. "If Brian is lurking around, we need to confront this head-on," Tom nodded, his expression hardening. "But we need to be smart about it. We can't let him manipulate the situation or put Oliver in danger." That afternoon, the private investigator called with an update. "The fabric you found matches the description of a jacket Brian's been seen wearing," he explained. "It's likely he's been trying to get close, either to see Oliver or intimidate you." A cold shiver ran down Grace's spine at the realization. "Do we have enough to involve the authorities?" "Yes," the investigator confirmed. "I've already provided the police with evidence of his recent behavior and his past restraining order. They're preparing to issue a warrant to question him." Despite the progress, the Millers knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down. In the following days, they took every precaution. Security cameras were installed around the property, and police patrols became a regular sight. Grace also reached out to their attorney Sarah, who advised them to file an additional restraining order for more legal protection. But even with all the measures in place, a heavy sense of unease lingered in the air. Charlie remained hypervigilant, barking at every unfamiliar sound, pacing restlessly through the house at night. It was clear. He knew something was wrong, just as the Millers did. "He knows something's not right," Tom said one evening, watching Charlie stand at the front window, ears perked, eyes scanning the night. Then, just as they were about to sit down for dinner, the doorbell rang. Grace and Tom exchanged a wary glance. "Were we expecting anyone?" Grace asked, instinctively scooping Oliver into her arms. Tom shook his head, his expression tense. "Stay here," he said, moving cautiously toward the door. Charlie followed close behind, a low growl rumbling in his throat as he stood next to Tom. When Tom opened the door, his breath caught. There, standing on the porch, was Brian Dempsey. His hands were stuffed deep into the pockets of a weathered jacket, and his posture was stiff, like he wasn't sure whether to be angry or apologetic. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Brian said quickly, his voice hesitant, but still carrying an edge. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. I need to see my son." Tom stepped outside, closing the door behind him but leaving it slightly ajar, the cool evening air rushing in. His stance was firm, unwavering. "You gave up that right when you abandoned him," Tom said, his voice low but filled with authority. "What are you doing here?" Brian's gaze flicked nervously toward the window, where Grace stood holding Oliver. His eyes darted back to Tom. "I made mistakes," Brian admitted, his voice barely a whisper, as if he wasn't sure if he even believed his own words. "But I've changed. I just want a chance to explain myself." Grace's heart clenched as she watched from inside. How dare he show up unannounced after everything Carla had gone through to protect Oliver from him? Her anger surged, and without a word, she handed Oliver to Linda, who had been visiting to help with dinner. Then Grace stepped outside to face Brian directly. "You don't get to waltz back into his life after abandoning him and Carla," she said, her voice sharp, laced with years of grief and betrayal. "Do you have any idea what she went through to protect him from you?" Brian flinched at her words, his face falling. "I didn't know how bad things had gotten for her," he said softly. "I made mistakes, but I want to make amends." Before Grace could respond, the sound of sirens sliced through the air. 2 police cars pulled up to the curb, their lights flashing in the twilight. Officers stepped out, their presence commanding and firm as they approached the porch. "Mr. Dempsey," one of the officers said firmly, "we need to speak with you." Brian looked startled, but didn't resist as the officers calmly escorted him to one of their cars. He shot one last, lingering glance at Grace and Tom, his gaze dark and defiant. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice filled with venom. "I'll be back." The officers reassured the Millers that Brian would be questioned thoroughly, and that the evidence they had would only strengthen the case against him. "We'll do everything we can to keep your family safe," one officer assured them, offering a brief but comforting smile. As the police cars pulled away, the weight of the moment settled heavily on Grace. She let out a shaky breath, her body still tense from the confrontation. "Do you think that's the last we'll see of him?" she asked quietly, her voice betraying her anxiety. Tom placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, grounding her with his calm presence. "We'll be ready if it's not," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "But for now, let's focus on keeping Oliver safe and moving forward." That night, the Millers sat together in the living room, finding comfort in the simple, familiar moments. Oliver played with Charlie on the floor, his infectious laughter filling the air as the puppy nuzzled his face. Grace watched, her heart swelling with love and a renewed sense of purpose. "We've come so far," she whispered softly, a smile tugging at her lips. "No matter what happens, we'll protect him." Tom nodded, his gaze fixed on their son, his expression resolute. "Carla trusted us with Oliver because she knew we'd fight for him," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And that's exactly what we'll do." As the evening wore on and the house quieted, the family prepared for bed. Charlie, ever loyal, settled by Oliver's crib, his watchful eyes scanning the room. Grace bent down to stroke his fur, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you, Charlie," she whispered. "We couldn't do this without you." The puppy's tail gave a soft thump against the floor, a small, comforting reminder that they weren't alone in their fight to protect their family. Late that night, after Oliver was sound asleep, Grace sat down at the kitchen table with a pen in hand. She felt a deep need to write a letter to Carla, Oliver's birth mother, though they hadn't heard from her since the adoption. There was so much she wanted to share. In the letter, Grace described Oliver's growth, the milestones that marked his journey, his infectious laughter, the way he eagerly explored the world, and the unbreakable bond he had formed with Charlie. She wrote of her profound gratitude for the trust Carla had placed in them, assuring her that Oliver was deeply loved, safe and cherished beyond measure. As Grace sealed the envelope, she felt a quiet sense of peace wash over her. Though Carla's presence might always remain distant, her brave decision had given life to the family they had built, a family that was whole and stronger than ever. The next evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Tom brought out a photo album he'd been secretly working on. His eyes twinkled with excitement as he opened it to the first page. "I thought it was time we started documenting our journey," he said with a warm smile, revealing the beautiful album. Inside were photos of Oliver's milestones, his first steps, birthday celebrations, and candid moments with Charlie. Grace laughed as she flipped through the pages, pointing out funny faces and sweet, tender memories. Then, at the very end of the album, Tom revealed one final surprise. He handed Grace a small, carefully framed certificate. "There's one more addition," he said with a proud grin. It was Charlie's official service dog certification. "He's earned it," Tom said, his voice full of pride. "He's not just Oliver's companion, he's his guardian." Grace's eyes filled with tears as she hugged Tom tightly, overcome with emotion. "He's the best guardian anyone could ask for," she whispered, feeling a deep, unspoken bond of gratitude and love for the dog who had become so much more than a pet. He was family. With their lives beginning to settle, Grace and Tom turned their attention to the future. Together, they started planning a backyard renovation, a safe, magical space where Oliver and Charlie could laugh and play freely, surrounded by the love and security of their home. Inspired by the support they'd received from their community, they also dreamed of giving back to others, paying forward the kindness that had helped them through their darkest days. As the Millers continued to reflect on their journey, a single idea began to grow in Grace's heart, an idea that felt like the perfect way to give back to the community that had supported them so generously. It was simple, yet profound, born from their own experiences with Charlie and the unwavering love they had seen in their loyal dog's eyes. One evening, as they sat together in their cozy living room, Grace turned to Tom with a thoughtful expression. "Tom," she said, her voice full of purpose, "what if we started a local program that connected rescue animals with families in need? A program that helps people see how a rescue dog can transform a home, just like Charlie transformed ours." Tom raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You mean like a pet adoption program?" "Exactly," Grace nodded, her eyes shining. "But with a twist. We could offer family support, help them adjust, provide resources, and share our story about how Charlie brought healing into our lives. There are so many Charlies out there waiting for a home." She paused for a moment, her voice softening as she spoke from the heart. "And if we can help even one family find their perfect companion, it'll be worth it. We can show them that these dogs aren't just pets, they're family." Tom sat back, letting the idea sink in. It was a dream, a beautiful one, and it made sense. He could already picture it, the joy on the faces of families as they found their own rescue dog, a loyal companion who would change their lives just as Charlie had changed theirs. "I love it," he said finally, his voice warm with excitement. "We'll share our story. We'll show how much love and healing a rescue dog can bring. We can help so many people find what we found." The months that followed were filled with new beginnings. The Millers threw themselves into this new venture with the same passion and dedication they had given to their family. They worked closely with local shelters, spreading the word about their program and offering resources for families to better understand the needs of rescue animals. They coordinated events, met with dog trainers, and brought together experts who could offer guidance on training and behavioral support. Grace and Tom were deeply involved in every step of the process. They shared their own story on social media, in local newsletters, and at community events, speaking candidly about how Charlie had helped Oliver through his toughest moments. They emphasized the powerful role that animals could play in healing and growth, showing the world that rescue dogs weren't just a second chance for the animals, they were a second chance for the families who welcomed them into their hearts. As they did, something incredible started to unfold. Families began to reach out, sharing their own stories of struggles and hopes. Some were looking for companionship, others for support through tough times. And with each connection, Grace and Tom saw the ripple effect of their efforts. More families were finding not just a pet, but a loyal, loving companion who was ready to change their lives. Through it all, Oliver continued to grow. His once fragile body became stronger each day, and his spirit even more determined. His laughter filled the house with warmth, his boundless energy a constant reminder of the strength and resilience he had within him. Charlie remained by his side, never straying far. The bond between them only deepened as time went on, each day cementing their friendship in a way words could never fully express. Charlie was more than just a dog. He was Oliver's protector, his best friend, his constant companion. He was the reminder that love could heal, that loyalty could restore, and that sometimes the smallest hearts could carry the greatest strength. One golden summer evening, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, the Millers found themselves sitting on a picnic blanket in the backyard. The sky above was streaked with hues of orange and pink, casting a soft glow over the world around them. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers, and the sounds of nature provided a peaceful soundtrack to their moment of contentment. Oliver, now a little boy full of energy and wonder, leaned against Charlie. His tiny hand rested gently on the dog's back, and his fingers twitched as they traced the soft fur. "I love you, Charlie," Oliver whispered, his voice filled with sincerity. The simplicity of his words brought a lump to Grace's throat. She had seen Oliver struggle, had seen him face challenges that no child should have to face, and yet here he was, stronger, braver, filled with a joy that was infectious. His words, so simple and pure, carried the kind of truth only a child could speak. Grace felt a quiet sense of awe at how far they had all come. Tom, sitting beside her, reached for her hand. They exchanged a smile, one full of gratitude and love. Their hearts were overflowing as they watched their son and their dog share a quiet moment of peace. They had faced so much, the pain of loss, the fear of the unknown, the uncertainty of the future, but they had come through it all stronger, united by the bond they shared. And that bond wasn't just between them and Oliver, it was the unspoken bond between them and Charlie, the unwavering loyalty that had saved them all. As the light of day faded into twilight, Grace looked at Tom, her voice soft as she spoke. "You know," she said, her words full of reflection, "if someone had told me a year ago that a little boy and a tiny puppy would change our lives forever, I wouldn't have believed them." Tom chuckled, a warm sound that filled the air between them. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" Grace nodded, her gaze turning back to Oliver and Charlie. "But I wouldn't have it any other way." And in that moment, as the stars began to twinkle above, Grace realized that this was the life they had built, one of love, loyalty, and family. They had faced the unimaginable, but they had come through it with hearts full of gratitude, ready to share the love they had found. This heartwarming journey is a reminder of the extraordinary bonds that can form between people and animals. The Millers were living proof of the healing power that an animal can bring into a home, how love can be transformative, how loyalty can be life-changing. Have you ever experienced a connection as special as the one Oliver and Charlie share? Have you ever found a companion who changed your life in ways you never imagined? We'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join us for more unforgettable tales. Together, let's celebrate the power of love, loyalty, and family. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.